Cristiano Ronaldo for many, his name means records, trophies, and footballing greatness, but for those who look beyond the pitch. Ronaldo is something more. He is a symbol of resilience, a beacon of hope, and at times, a quiet force of kindness that touches lives far away from the stadium in 2024. That kindness reached a boy named Francisco. Francisco was not a footballer, not a celebrity, not even someone who imagined he would ever meet. Ronaldo was just a child, living an ordinary life in Portugal with his family. But when tragedy struck, when a devastating explosion stole away his mother, father, and sister, Francisco's world collapsed. Severely injured, placed in a coma, and fighting for his life. Francisco's story could have ended there, but fate had other plans, because sometimes, when the darkness seems overwhelming, light finds its way in. And in this story, that light came in the form of humanity's compassion. An influencer named Isho Speed, and one of the greatest athletes to ever live, Cristiano Ronaldo. This is not just a story about football, it is a story about tragedy, survival, community, and above all, kindness, a kindness that stretched across borders, across cultures, across millions of hearts, to reach one little boy who had lost everything. And so today, we dive deep into Francisco's journey, from the night that changed everything, to the miraculous recovery, to the day he finally stood in front of his idol, Cristiano Ronaldo, and discovered that even in a world filled with pain, kindness can still win. Before the world came to know Francisco as the boy who met Ronaldo, he was just a child living in Portugal. And to understand the weight of his story, we must first pause and look at the life he had before tragedy struck. Francisco's family was not wealthy, not famous, not powerful. They lived a modest life in a small Portuguese town, surrounded by the everyday rhythms of working-class life. His father worked long hours. His mother was the heart of the home, and his sister, slightly older, was both his playmate and protector for them. Happiness was found in small, ordinary moments, family meals, walks in the park, playful arguments over the TV, and dreams quietly spoken at night. Like countless children in Portugal, Francisco loved football. In Portugal, football isn't just a game, it's a language, a culture, a way of life. On weekends, neighbors gather to watch matches. Children crowd playgrounds to imitate their favorite players, and every street corner echoes with the sound of a ball bouncing against a wall. And towering above all of it, above every league, every player, every local legend, was Cristiano Ronaldo. For Francisco, Ronaldo was not just a star, he was the star. Had posters of him on his walls, watched his highlights endlessly on YouTube, and often went outside trying to mimic Ronaldo's free kicks and celebrations. The famous CU celebration? Francisco would do it almost daily after scoring goals in street football matches with friends. But why Ronaldo? What made this man, born decades earlier on the island of Madeira, such a hero to Francisco and millions of other kids? It wasn't just the goals or the records, it was the story behind the man. Francisco knew Ronaldo had come from humble beginnings, growing up in poverty, wearing hand-me-down clothes, using every ounce of his determination to rise against the odds. Ronaldo's journey was proof that no matter where you start, no matter how little you have, greatness is still possible if you work for it. And for Francisco, that was inspiring, because like Ronaldo, his family didn't have much, but he believed that with hard work and big dreams, maybe, just maybe, life could change. Family was at the center of his world. His mother's care, his father's presence, his sister's companionship, these things made his small world whole. And like every child, he assumed they would always be there, that home would always be filled with love and warmth, that tomorrow would look much like today. But life is fragile, and in 2024, Francisco would learn this in the harshest way imaginable, because on one tragic night, everything he knew, everything he loved, was taken from him in a single, devastating momento. Truly understand the weight of what happened later in Francisco's story, we need to understand what Cristiano Ronaldo represents in Portugal, because in Francisco's country, Ronaldo isn't just a footballer, he is an institution, a national treasure, a living symbol of what is possible. Portugal is a small nation with a big heart nestled along the Atlantic. It has a proud history of explorers, poets, and dreamers, but in the modern age, few names have carried Portugal's identity to the world stage quite like Cristiano Ronaldo. From Madeira to Manchester, from Madrid to Turin, and then to Saudi Arabia, Ronaldo's journey is told in every schoolyard, every playground, and every cafe where football conversations never seem to end. For children like Francisco, growing up in humble surroundings, Ronaldo was more than a player, he was proof that greatness can emerge from small places. Ronaldo himself grew up in poverty on the island of Madeira. The son of a gardener and a cook, his family didn't always have enough, but he had passion, drive, and relentless discipline. He fought through hardship, left home at a young age, and turned struggle into strength. This story resonated deeply with Portuguese families. Parents would point to Ronaldo as an example to their children. Look at what he achieved. He came from nothing, and now he is everything. Work hard, and you too can achieve your dreams. Francisco's father often told him stories about Ronaldo's dedication, how he stayed after training when others had gone home, practicing free kicks until sunset, how he ignored the doubts of those who said he was too skinny, too emotional, too weak, how he transformed himself into the very definition of professional. His stories weren't just about football, they were lessons in life, lessons about resilience, focus, and the importance of never giving up. And Francisco, young and full of dreams, absorbed those lessons. For Francisco and his friends, wearing Ronaldo's jersey wasn't just about supporting a player, it was about wearing a symbol of hope, a symbol that no matter how small your town, no matter how poor your family, your dreams were valid. So when Francisco kicked a ball on dusty streets, he imagined he was Ronaldo scoring the winning goal. When he celebrated with arms outstretched, he imagined a stadium roaring his name. And when he lay in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, he often thought, if Ronaldo can do it, maybe I can too. Cristiano Ronaldo was the kind of figure who made children believe in themselves. And that belief mattered especially for a boy like Francisco, whose family wasn't wealthy, but who had endless dreams. And it is this connection, this deep admiration for Ronaldo, that makes what happened later in Francisco's life so powerful, so moving, and so unforgettable. When the night of tragedy came, and when Francisco lost everything, the light that would eventually reach him was not just from strangers online, not just from influencers raising funds, but from the man whose posters had hung on his wall, man who had unknowingly been his hero. Long before they ever met Cristiano Ronaldo, before Francisco could meet his idol, before kindness came pouring in from around the world, tragedy first had to strike. And when it did, it was brutal. June 26th, too old for a warm summer night in Portugal for Francisco and his family. It began like any other evening. Dinner was finished, the house smelled faintly of food, and the quiet comfort of family surrounded him. His sister teased him about football. His mother reminded him about brushing his teeth before bed, and his father spoke about work with the tired voice of a man who carried heavy responsibilities, but never complained. It was a night of ordinary life, simple, peaceful, and familiar. And then, in a single instant, that life was ripped apart. The explosion came without warning. Gone moment. The house was standing the next. It was consumed by fire, noise, and destruction. Walls trembled, glass shattered, and flames leapt into the night sky, as though the earth itself had cracked open. Neighbors later described the sound as deafening, like thunder. Trapped in a small room, people rushed into the streets, confused, panicked, staring at the plume of smoke that rose where Francisco's home once stood. Inside, chaos regnant. Francis' world had turned into a nightmare of fire and rubble. The blast knocked him down. Flames licked his skin, and pain erupted across his body. His small hands, the same ones that once held a football so tightly, were now burned and broken. His abdomen, scarred by the flames, bore wounds that would take months, perhaps years to heal. But the physical injuries were only part of the tragedy. When the fire settled and rescuers searched through the wreckage, the reality became clear. Francisco's mother gone, his father gone, his sister gone. A family that had been his entire world torn away in a single moment of devastation. When firefighters pulled Francisco from the rubble, he was barely conscious. His small frame, covered in burns, told the story of unimaginable pain. He was rushed to the hospital with critical injuries. Doctors placed him in an induced coma. Fighting to save his fragile body for over a week, Francisco lay still, his young life hanging by a thread. Machines kept him alive, beeping steadily in a hospital room filled with grief and uncertainty. Doctors warned the surviving relatives that the boy's chances were slim. Even if he lived, the journey ahead would be long and brutal. And in those nights of waiting, as Francisco's relatives wept in hospital corridors, a cruel truth lingered. If Francisco opened his eyes again, he would wake up to a world without his parents, without his sister, without the home he once knew. The explosion didn't just destroy walls and windows, it destroyed innocence. It shattered a childhood. It stole from a boy the security of family and left him in a sea of pain. In Portugal, news outlets quietly began to report the story. A tragic accident, a young survivor in the hospital, a life forever changed, but for the world. Francisco was still just another name in another head lineage in that hospital room. A miracle was still possible because even though Francisco's body was weak, his spirit had not yet given up, and 1 week later, against the odds, the boy opened his eyes when Francisco's eyes finally opened after more than a week in a coma. Doctors and nurses called it nothing short of a miracle. For days they had whispered in the hallways, uncertain if he would ever wake up. Some believed his injuries were too severe, his young body too weak to withstand the trauma, but Francisco had something inside him, a spark of resilience, a quiet will to live that refused to go out. Yet waking up was not the same as recovery. The moment his eyes fluttered open, Francisco was thrust into a new reality. His hands were wrapped in heavy bandages, stiff and painful. His abdomen throbbed with every small movement. Tubes ran across his body. Machines beeped steadily beside his bed. The sterile smell of disinfectant filled the room. This was no longer the warmth of home, it was the cold, relentless fight of survival. Everyday tasks became monumental challenges. Lifting a cup of water burned his hands. Sitting up in bed drained his strength. Taking even a single step required the help of nurses and a walker, his small frame wobbling, his legs trembling. For a boy who once ran freely through the streets chasing footballs, the reality of moving inch by inch was crushing, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional on it. First, Francisco did not understand in his fragile state. He asked for his mother. He whispered for his sister. He wondered why his father hadn't come to see him. Doctors and relatives avoided his questions, their eyes heavy with sorrow. And then, slowly, the truth was explained. His family was gone, and no child should ever have to hear those words. Weight of that reality broke him in ways that medicine could not mend. He wept quietly, sometimes loudly, sometimes in silence. When no tears would come, the grief was endless, raw, and impossible to fully process. He was alive, but his world was gone. And yet, in the midst of this unbearable suffering, something remarkable happened. Francisco did not give up. Each day, he tried to stand a little longer. Each week, he pushed himself to take a few more steps with his walker. Each session with his doctors and therapists was a battle between pain and progress. Hospital staff, many of them hardened by years of seeing tragedy, were moved by his determination. Nurses often said, "He's stronger than most adults we know." His relatives, though devastated, clung to his small victories. Every smile, every step, every word spoken became a triumph. In those long hospital days, Francisco clung to memories of his old life, and at the center of many of those memories was football and the hero who had inspired him since he was little, Cristiano Ronaldo. And therapists asked him what motivated him. Francisco whispered that one day he wanted to meet Ronaldo. One day he wanted to tell his idol how much he inspired him to fight for. Now, though, the boy's fight was in silence, behind hospital walls outside. Few people knew of his suffering, but that was about to change because his story, his tragedy, his courage was about to reach the wider world. And when it did, millions would be touched, strangers would become family, and one very special hero would step forward. For weeks, Francisco's life was confined to the white walls of the hospital. His days blurred together. Checkups, therapy sessions, long hours of pain followed by moments of fragile hope. He was awake now, but the world outside remained unaware of the boy who had survived tragedy only to face a future filled with scars and loss that began to change when his story reached the ears of someone who had dedicated his life to sharing stories of resilience and need. His name was Zachary Durniowski, better known online as Motivator, a Canadian influencer and philanthropist. Zach had built a following by traveling the world, meeting people in difficult situations, and mobilizing strangers to help. His content wasn't just entertainment. It was a digital movement of compassion. When Zach heard about Francisco, he knew the world needed to hear this story. A young boy who had lost everything, his family, his home, his health, and yet continued to fight. It wasn't just heartbreaking, it was a call to action. And so, he visited Francisco, filmed his story, and shared it. Online footage was simple yet powerful. A small boy with bandaged hands, walking carefully with a frame, his body marked by burns, his eyes carrying the weight of loss. Behind that fragile body, however, was courage, the kind of courage that inspires strangers to pause, reflect, and feel compelled to act. When the video went live, it spread quickly. People from Portugal, Europe, and far beyond were moved to tears. They shared the video, commented messages of encouragement, and began donating to help Francisco's recovery. Some gave a little, some gave a lot, but each donation was a reminder that he was not alone. The internet, often criticized for negativity, showed its better side. Thousands of people who would never meet Francisco suddenly cared for him. His tragedy became personal to them. His recovery became a mission. They wanted to support, and among the millions who watched the story unfold was a young man who had built his career on energy, chaos, and above all, an obsession with Cristiano Ronaldo. That man was Speed, known for his over-the-top personality, his comedic rants, and his passionate love for Ronaldo. Connected instantly with Francisco's story, here was a boy from Ronaldo's homeland, a boy who loved Ronaldo, who was suffering, who needed help for Speed. This wasn't just another viral video. This was Justinian when Speed acted. His reach was massive. His fans numbered in the millions. His connection to Ronaldo was legendary, and now his voice would amplify Francisco's story louder than ever before. The internet was no longer just watching. It was unity. France's story was no longer just about one child in Portugal. It was about the power of humanity to come together, and it was only the beginning. To understand why Speed's involvement in Francisco's story mattered so much, we first need to understand who Speed is and what he represents. Stern Watkins Jr., better known by his online name Speed, is one of the most recognizable content creators in the world. His streams are chaotic, filled with humor, energy, and unpredictability, but beyond the jokes and memes, one thing defines him more than anything else: his love, his obsession for Cristiano Ronaldo. This love wasn't a passing trend. Speed built a large part of his online identity around Ronaldo. He imitated his voice, screamed his name in excitement, and, of course, copied the famous "See You" celebration in countless videos. His passion was so intense that it became a meme, spreading across platforms and even reaching Ronaldo himself. Fans didn't just laugh at Speed's antics, they celebrated the sincerity behind the man. This sincerity is what made his connection to Francisco's story so powerful. He was a boy, a young fan in Portugal, who loved Ronaldo just as much, a boy whose room once had posters of his idol, whose dreams were fueled by the legend of CR7, and whose hope was tied to the idea that heroes can inspire us to keep going. Francisco's admiration for Ronaldo mirrored Speed's own obsession, but in Francisco's case, it wasn't just entertainment, it was survival. When Speed saw Francisco's story online, he didn't hesitate. He used his platform to amplify it. He urged his fans to donate, to share, to rally behind this boy. Millions of young people who followed Speed, many of them Ronaldo fans themselves, suddenly felt connected to Francisco. The response was overwhelming. Donations poured in, messages of love and encouragement filled the comment section. Speed's voice turned what might have been a small fundraiser into a global movement, but Speed's involvement also created something deeper. He bridged two worlds, the digital universe of his young audience and the real-life tragedy of a boy who desperately needed help. Without Speed, Francisco's story might have remained local, a heartbreaking headline in Portugal. With Speed, it became international, and there was something almost poetic about it. Speed, the superfan who had chased Ronaldo across continents, finally found a way to connect his passion to something meaningful, something bigger than himself. By helping Francisco, he wasn't just supporting a boy, he was honoring the spirit of Ronaldo himself, the man who had always stood for resilience, hard work, and giving back. This was no longer just about one boy's survival. It had become a symbol of what can happen when fandom, compassion, and influence call it a bit. The story was still unfolding, because as the donations grew, as the world learned Francisco's name, one question began to rise in everyone's hearts: would Cristiano Ronaldo himself step into this story? The answer was yes, and when it happened, it created one of the most touching moments of Francisco's life. The fundraiser reached new heights and Francisco's story spread across the globe. Whispers began to circulate. Would Cristiano Ronaldo himself find out? Would he step into this story? For many, it seemed like a fantasy. Ronaldo was a global superstar, a man whose schedule was packed with matches, training, and obligations. He lived under the constant spotlight of fame, with millions vying for his attention every day. To expect him to notice the story of one boy, even a boy from his own homeland, felt unrealistic. Cristiano Ronaldo has never been just a footballer. Time and again, he has shown the world that beyond the stadium lights and the trophies, he is a man who cares deeply about people, especially children. He has donated millions to hospitals, funded surgeries for kids, and given his time to causes most celebrities would never even acknowledge. And so, when Ronaldo heard about Francisco, the orphan boy who had survived a devastating explosion, who had lost his family, who adored him, he didn't hesitate. He knew he had to be part of this story. The meeting was arranged quietly, Without the usual fanfare or media circus, this wasn't about publicity, it wasn't about headlines. It was about a boy, and his hero hand Francisco was told that he would be meeting Cristiano Ronaldo. He couldn't believe it for days. He asked if it was real. He repeated the words over and over, as though saying them aloud might make them true. I'm going to meet Ronaldo? Really? And then the day came. Francisco, still frail from his injuries, walked into the room nervously. His small frame carried the weight of both anticipation and disbelief. And then he saw him, Cristiano Ronaldo, the man he had admired all his life, standing there with a warm smile. For a moment, Francisco froze. His body stiffened. His breath caught in his throat. This wasn't a poster. This wasn't a video on YouTube. This was Ronaldo, real, present, larger-than-life fiend Ronaldo. Sensing the boy's hesitation, didn't wait. He walked forward, bent down, and embraced him. It wasn't the handshake of a celebrity greeting a fan. It was the embrace of a human being comforting another human being. Francisco wept. All the pain, the grief, the loneliness of the past months seemed to pour out of him in that single moment, but Ronaldo held him close, whispering words of encouragement, telling him to stay strong, telling him he wasn't alone anymore. It was a scene that needed no cameras, no headlines. The look in Francisco's eyes said it all. Hope had returned. Ronaldo spent time with him, listening to his story, talking to him not as a superstar, but as a friend. He gave him jerseys, signed memorabilia, and promised to support him in his recovery. But more importantly, he gave him something money could never buy: belief. For Francisco, meeting Ronaldo wasn't just a dream come true, it was a turning point. From that day on, he wasn't just surviving for himself, he was inspired to fight harder, to heal, to live, because he knew his hero believed in him. For everyone who saw or later heard about that meeting, it was a reminder of the true power of kindness, a reminder that sometimes the greatest victories aren't won on the football pitch, but in the quiet moments where one person chooses to lift another. For Francisco, the meeting with Cristiano Ronaldo was more than a dream come true, it was a rebirth of hope. Until that day, his recovery had been a painful uphill battle. The surgeries, the endless therapy sessions, the sleepless nights haunted by grief, it all weighed heavily on his young shoulders. But after meeting Ronaldo, something shifted deep within him. The boy who once struggled to find the will to get out of bed now had a reason to fight harder. The boy who often broke down in tears during therapy began to push through the pain, whispering to himself, Ronaldo believes in me. Doctors noticed the difference almost immediately. Francisco's progress accelerated. He was more motivated, more focused, more determined than ever before. What once took days to accomplish in therapy, he now achieved in hours. Nurses often caught him smiling, replaying the memory of that hug, that moment, over and over. And his men psychologists working with Francisco spoke about the power of role models in recovery. When a child loses everything, hope can be fragile, but when that hope is reinforced by a living hero, by someone the child already admires deeply, it can become unbreakable. In Francisco's case, Ronaldo became more than a footballer. He became a symbol of survival, a guiding light in the darkness. And it wasn't just Francisco who was changed. His story, amplified by Ronaldo's gesture, continued to ripple outward. Millions of people around the world followed his upgrades. They celebrated each milestone in his recovery: his first steps without the walker, his first smile after surgery, his first words of gratitude spoken publicly. In Portugal, Francisco became a beacon of resilience. Schools told his story to inspire students. Charity events were held in his honor, reminding people of the importance of unity and compassion for many. His journey embodied the Portuguese spirit of perseverance, a small nation that has always punched above its weight on the global stage. Much like Ronaldo himself, and Ronaldo didn't just disappear after their meeting. He continued to check in, sending messages of encouragement, reminding Francisco that he was part of something bigger. In doing so, he proved once again that kindness isn't just about grand gestures, it's about consistency, about showing up when it matters most. For Francisco, this wasn't just healing from burns or learning to walk again. This was the reconstruction of his entire life. With each step forward, he wasn't just moving toward physical recovery, he was rebuilding his sense of identity, his belief in love, and his faith in the future. It was as though Ronaldo had passed him a torch of strength, of resilience, of hope, and Francisco carried it proudly, lighting the way for others who faced darkness. And word finally spread that Cristiano Ronaldo had met Francisco. The global reaction was immediate and powerful. What had started as a local tragedy had now evolved into a worldwide story of compassion, resilience, and the extraordinary power of kindness. News outlets across Portugal were the first to break the story. Headlines read, Cristiano Ronaldo meets orphan, a Portuguese explosion. From tragedy to hope, Ronaldo embraces survivor Francisco. A hero beyond football, Ronaldo inspires a young boy's recovery soon. International media picked it up. Major outlets from Spain, the UK, the US, and beyond ran features about the boy who had lost everything, and the superstar who gave him hope. It wasn't just sports journalists who covered it. Human interest reporters, lifestyle magazines, and even television programs included Francisco's journey. In their broadcast, public reaction was just as overwhelming. On social media, millions shared the story, praising Ronaldo not just as a footballer, but as a humanitarian. Hashtags like #RonaldoKindness, #FranciscoStrong, and #CR7 for hope trended across platforms. Fans who had admired Ronaldo for his talent now had even more reason to admire him for his humanitarian. Athletes and influencers joined in, some donated to the fundraiser, others sent personal messages to Francisco, telling him to stay strong. A few even shared their own stories of loss and survival, showing how his journey had touched something deeply personal. In the man perhaps most touching of all were the thousands of ordinary people who wrote letters and sent gifts to Francisco, from hand-drawn cards by children to heartfelt letters by parents. Each message carried the same theme: you are not alone. The media also reflected on Ronaldo's history of generosity. They reminded audiences that this wasn't the first time he had quietly stepped in to help a child in need, from paying for life-saving surgeries to donating millions to hospitals. Ronaldo had long been using his wealth and influence to make a difference, but this story with Francisco felt different. It wasn't about money, it was about presence, about empathy, about showing up when it mattered most. For many, it solidified Ronaldo's reputation as more than just an athlete. He wasn't just a record breaker, a champion, a global brand. He was also a man who never forgot his roots, who never turned away from those in need, especially children. And for Francisco, the global attention brought more than just recognition. It brought opportunities. More donations came in, more organizations reached out to help, and more doors opened for his long-term recovery and education. The world wasn't just watching his story, they were actively shaping it. In a time when the world often feels divided, Francisco's journey and Ronaldo's act of kindness became a reminder of something simple yet profound. Humanity is still capable of extraordinary compassion. When people first heard about Francisco, they felt sympathy. A young boy, orphaned in a tragic explosion, clinging to life in a hospital bed. It was heartbreaking, but as his journey unfolded, and especially when Cristiano Ronaldo stepped into the picture, the story grew into something far larger. It became symbolic at its core. Francisco's story is not just about survival, it is about the universal human desire for hope. Every person, no matter where they come from, knows what it feels like to lose something, to face hardship, to question whether life will ever get better. In Francisco's struggles, people saw a reflection of their own darkest moments, and in his courage, they saw the possibility of rising again. Ronaldo's presence in the story amplified that symbolism to millions. He represents achievement, success, and glory. He is the man who climbed from humble beginnings on the small island of Madeira to the very top of world football. He is proof that resilience and determination can defy all odds. So, when Ronaldo embraced Francisco, the meaning went beyond fan and idol. It was as though hope itself had embraced tragedy. Success had reached down to lift suffering, light had met darkness. And this is why the world resonated so deeply with the story. It wasn't just about a boy and a footballer, it was about what their meeting represented for some. It was a reminder of the importance of kindness in a world too often filled with division. For others, it was proof that fame and fortune don't have to make someone distant or untouchable. And for children everywhere, it was a powerful example that heroes can be real and that they can care. Psychologists even noted the phenomenon: when communities come together around a story of hope, it strengthens not only the survivor, but the people watching. Donors felt uplifted by giving, viewers felt inspired by Francisco's courage. Ronaldo's kindness created a chain reaction of compassion that spread far beyond Portugal. Francisco himself became more than a victim of tragedy, he became a living symbol of resilience. His story reminded people that even in the face of unimaginable loss, the human spirit can endure, that even in the darkest times, one act of kindness can change everything. And for Ronaldo, This wasn't just another kind gesture, it added to his legacy in a way statistics never could. Goals and trophies can break records, but stories like Francisco's are what live forever in people's hearts long after fans forget the score of a match. They will remember the image of Ronaldo hugging a fragile boy who had lost it a lit. Was football transcending sport? It was humanity at its best. After the wave of support and the unforgettable meeting with Cristiano Ronaldo, Francisco's life began to shift from tragedy toward rebuilding. His scars, both physical and emotional, remained, but with every passing day, the boy who had once been broken by grief started to find new reasons to keep moving forward. Donations collected through the fundraiser ensured that he had access to some of the best medical treatments available. Specialists worked with him on advanced therapies to restore mobility in his hands and legs. Doctors who once worried about whether he would ever walk properly again now celebrated his steady progress. But the transformation wasn't only physical. Psychological care became a cornerstone of his recovery. Therapists helped him process the trauma of losing his family, teaching him coping strategies to deal with flashbacks, nightmares, and the overwhelming grief of being an orphan. While the pain never fully disappeared, Francisco was learning how to carry it with resilience. Instead of being crushed by it, education also became a focus. Local schools, inspired by his courage, offered scholarships and support to ensure he could continue studying. Despite his hardships, teachers encouraged him not just as a student, but as a role model for his classmates. His story became a lesson in perseverance for other children, a reminder that strength isn't about avoiding pain, it's about rising after and through it all. Francisco held on to his love for football though his body bore scars. His passion for the game never dimmed with time. He began to join light training sessions in youth academies, encouraged by coaches who knew his story. He was slower than before, but he carried the ball with determination. Every kick, every pass, every small moment on the pitch became a declaration. I am still here. I am still fighting. Ronaldo's continued support added fuel to his dreams. Francisco often spoke about wanting to not just recover, but to give back, to one day help other children the way he was helped. The kindness shown to him had planted a seed of generosity in his own heart, and the world, watching from afar, cheered for him. Updates on his recovery continued to spread online, with fans calling him a warrior, a survivor, and even a little Ronaldo. His courage was no longer just a personal journey. It had become an inspiration for millions. For Francisco, the future was no longer just a question of survival, it was a canvas waiting to be painted, with new dreams of future where he could study, play, laugh, and perhaps one day use his story to give hope to others who face loss and hardship. The boy who once lay in a hospital bed, unsure if he would live to see tomorrow, now stood with a growing vision of tomorrow. And it all began with the love of strangers, the energy of a digital movement, and the kindness of one man. Cristiano Ronaldo. Francis' journey is not just the story of one child. And one act of kindness, it's a mirror held up to humanity. It asks us to look at who we are, what we value, and what role kindness plays in our lives. At the surface, it's about survival and generosity. A boy survives a tragedy, strangers help, and a global superstar steps in to make his dream come true. But if we look deeper, we see that this story carries lessons far greater than its parts. Tragedy can unite us. We live in a world that often feels divided by borders, by politics, by culture, and yet Francisco's story showed that pain has no language, no nationality. When people saw a young boy in need, they didn't ask about his background, they simply acted. Donations came from every continent, proving that compassion can cross oceans and time zones. Kindness is contagious in small acts. Sharing Francisco's story set off a chain reaction. That story reached its speed. Who amplified it to millions? Then it reached Ronaldo, who gave it a heartbeat of humanity. Each act built upon the other, showing how kindness spreads like ripples in water. What begins as one gesture can grow into a wave that touches the world. Heroes are human. Too. Cristiano Ronaldo is celebrated for his goals, his trophies, and his legacy on the pitch, but his embrace of Francisco reminded us that true greatness isn't measured by medals, it's measured by the ability to show up for someone who has nothing to give in return. In that quiet hug, Ronaldo taught the world that even the most famous among us can choose humility and compassion. Ronaldo's career will one day end. The goals will stop, the stadiums will quiet, the records may be broken, but moments like these where he changes a life become eternal. They live not in statistics, but in the hearts of people long after Francisco grows up, long after football fans forget specific matches. The story of Ronaldo's kindness will endure. Ultimately, The broader legacy of Francisco's story is simple but profound. We all have the power to change someone's life. Not all of us have Ronaldo's fame or Speed's audience, but each of us can offer kindness in our own way, a word of encouragement, a helping hand, a donation, or simply presence. Of the world may be filled with suffering, but stories like this remind us that it is also filled with extraordinary love. Cristiano Ronaldo has lifted trophies, broken records, and inspired millions through his brilliance on the pitch, but as extraordinary as those achievements are, they are not what truly defines his greatness. What defines him, what makes him unforgettable beyond football, is the way he uses his platform to lift others. The story of Francisco proves this year was a boy who lost everything in a moment of tragedy. His family was gone, his home destroyed, his body scarred, his childhood stolen. For many, that would have been the end of the story, but instead, it became a story of survival, of resilience, and of extraordinary compassion. Because strangers cared, Francisco had the medical treatment he needed because Zach shared his story. The world learned his name because Isho Speed amplified his voice. Millions rallied behind Hyman because Ronaldo stepped in not as a superstar, but as a human being. Francisco's broken spirit found the strength to rise again. This is more than a story about football. It is a story about humanity. It reminds us that no matter how divided the world may seem, kindness has the power to bring us together. It reminds us that our heroes are not only those who score goals, but those who touch hearts. It reminds us that even in our darkest hours, there is always light waiting to break through. Francisco's journey is still ongoing. His scars remain, and his road ahead will not be easy, but he no longer walks that road alone. With the love of the world behind him and the memory of Ronaldo's embrace in his heart, he carries something stronger than pain. He carries hope, and that hope, my friends, is what makes this story timeless. So as we close this chapter, ask yourself, what can I do today to be someone's Ronaldo? You don't need millions of followers or a superstar's fame. Sometimes all it takes is listening. Sometimes it's offering encouragement. Sometimes it's giving what little you can to someone who needs it, because kindness, no matter how small, can change a life just as it changed Francisco Sand. That is the true legacy of Cristiano Ronaldo, not just as a football legend, but as a legend of humanity. Thank you for watching this incredible story of kindness and resilience. If Francisco's journey touched your heart, share this video so more people can be inspired. And remember, legends aren't made only on the pitch. They're made in moments of compassion. Be part of that legacy.